On Monday, May 18th, 2026, at 09:05 in the morning, a 5.3 magnitude earthquake struck off the southern coast of Myanmar. That is 3 days ago. The epicenter was 247 kilometers from Bangkok. By conventional seismic standards, a 5.3 at 247 kilometers should produce barely perceptible ground motion in a major city. A slight shiver, a feeling that something might be wrong, not enough to evacuate, not enough to alarm anyone. In Bangkok, lights swung from ceilings in the AMLO building in the city center. Residents on upper floors across 6 major Bangkok districts, Don Mueang, Phaya Thai, Bang Rak, Hoi Quang, Pathum Wan, Klong Toe, reported noticeable tremors. Staff evacuated high-rise buildings across the metropolitan area, not because of the 5.3, because of what is underneath Bangkok. Because Professor Penung Warnichai, director of the Earthquake Research Center of Thailand, the leading authority on Bangkok's seismic vulnerability, has now confirmed in public statements what the March 28, 2025 collapse already proved. The ground under Bangkok is not like the ground under other cities. It is not rock. It is not clay in the ordinary sense. It is a deep, layered basin of soft marine sediment that took centuries to accumulate. A bowl of compressible material sitting beneath 17 million people. And that bowl is an amplifier, not just for large earthquakes, for any earthquake, from any direction, at any distance. When seismic waves arrive at the edge of the Bangkok basin from a 5.3 that nobody in most cities would notice, they enter the soft sediment and they slow down. And when a wave slows, its energy concentrates. The ground acceleration measured outside the basin, 3 to 6 megacorn. The ground acceleration measured inside the basin, 20 megacorns or higher, 3 to 6 times stronger. On May 18th, 2026, the lights in the AMLO building were not swinging because of a distant 5.3. They were swinging because Bangkok sits in a geological bowl that turns distant earthquakes into local amplified events. And because the Sagaing fault in Myanmar, which caused the 7.7 magnitude earthquake on March 28, 2025, that killed 95 people in a single building in this city, has not stopped moving. It has produced 468 aftershocks since that day. The fault is still active, the bowl is still amplifying, and the buildings built before Bangkok's first meaningful seismic code in 2009 are still standing exactly as they were built. Without seismic design, without earthquake reinforcement, in a city of 17 million people, that is the beginning. This is the rest of the story. Here is what Bangkok's Building Inspection Directive from April 2025 does not explain. After the collapse of the State Audit Office building on March 28, 2025, Bangkok's Governor Chadchart Siddhapunt issued a directive. Every high-rise building 23 meters or taller must submit a structural inspection report. Every large building covering more than 10,000 square meters. Every hotel with 80 rooms or more. Every condominium with more than 2,000 square meters of floor area. The list covers most of the significant building stock in the city. The directive was well-intentioned. The problem is what it cannot measure. Thailand's first seismic code was introduced in 1997. It applied to certain regions, not Bangkok. A 2007 revision included Bangkok. It lacked detailed seismic design rules. A comprehensive seismic standard was finally issued in 2009. This means that every building in Bangkok completed before 2009, and there are thousands of them, including some of the city's most prominent towers, hotels, and office buildings, was designed and built without any meaningful earthquake resistance requirement specific to the amplification characteristics of Bangkok's soft soil. Not a reduced seismic code, not a simplified code, no seismic code at all. Professor Penung's research team, in a study of 98 buildings in Thailand, found striking differences between how pre-2009 buildings were assumed to vibrate by design codes and how they actually vibrate when seismic waves arrive. The buildings sway at frequencies that their designers did not account for, because the designers did not know Bangkok's soil would amplify distant earthquakes. Because the seismic code that should have told them did not exist yet. The National Earthquake Research Center surveyed 1,000 buildings following the 2025 tremors. The finding about mid-rise buildings of around 24 stories, approximately 10% showed signs of damage from a single 7.7 magnitude earthquake, centered 1,000 kilometers away. The finding about very tall buildings of 60 stories or more, 50% of the 6 buildings surveyed suffered damage. Half of the tallest buildings sampled from one earthquake, from 1,000 kilometers away, through Bangkok's soft soil amplifier. This is the city that is shaking again. Start in 1997, Bangkok, the year Thailand introduces its first seismic design code. This matters because of everything that already exists before that year. Bangkok's construction boom did not begin in 1997. It began in the 1960s and accelerated through the 1970s, 1980s, and the economic surge of the early 1990s that ended with the Asian financial crisis of 1997. By the time Thailand's first seismic code appeared, Bangkok already had a skyline. hundreds of high-rise buildings, office towers on Siloam Road, hotels on Sukhumvit, condominiums across Ashoka and Ratchada, government buildings throughout the Old City, none of them designed with Bangkok's specific soil conditions in mind. Because those conditions, the amplification factor, the resonance frequencies, the way the soft soil basin extends and concentrates seismic energy, were known to researchers, known to engineers who studied the 1985 Mexico City earthquake, which happened 400 kilometers from the epicenter that generated it, which killed between 5,000 and 10,000 people in a city built on the soft lacustrine clay of a drained lakebed. Mexico City, 1985, is the closest geological analog to Bangkok that exists in modern disaster records. A major city, built on soft, compressible, water-saturated urban soil, struck not by a local fault but by a distant subduction zone earthquake whose energy was transformed by the local geology into something far more destructive than any model had predicted. The parallel is not approximate, it is direct. Mexico City's soil amplified the 1985 Michoacan earthquake by 4 to 8 times at the sediment surface. Bangkok's soil amplifies distant earthquakes by 3 to 6 times. Same mechanism, same physics, same category of threat. The difference is that Mexico City's 1985 earthquake happened before Bangkok finished building its skyline. Bangkok's engineers had the lesson available to them through the 1990s and into the 2000s. The code that incorporated it did not arrive until 2009, and the buildings constructed between 1960 and 2009, the core of Bangkok's urban building stock, carry that history in their concrete and steel, designed without the knowledge that is now known, standing in the bowl that amplifies every tremor from every direction. On May 18, 2026, 3 days ago, when the 5.3 magnitude earthquake sent light swinging in Bangkok's AMLO building, those pre-2009 buildings absorbed that amplified motion without any monitoring system, telling anyone how much stress their structural frames actually experienced. Because Professor Penung's plan to install structural health monitoring in 20 pilot buildings is targeted for later this year, 20 buildings out of thousands, the monitoring that would tell officials whether the May 18th shaking caused invisible micro-damage to the city's pre-code stock does not yet exist at meaningful scale. The city shook 3 days ago. Nobody knows what it did to the inside of the buildings that shook with it. Here is what the 468 aftershocks do not explain. On March 28, 2025, the 7.7 magnitude earthquake that struck the Sagaing region of Myanmar was not a standard fault rupture. It was a super shear earthquake. A super shear event is one where the rupture front, the crack propagating along the fault surface, travels faster than the shear waves it generates, faster than the speed at which seismic energy normally travels through rock. This has specific consequences. In a standard fault rupture, the seismic energy radiates outward in all directions from the fault surface. Distance attenuates it. By the time it reaches 1,000 kilometers, it is spread across a hemisphere of ground and weakened substantially. In a super shear rupture, the energy is directionally focused. Like the sonic boom of a supersonic aircraft, the seismic energy concentrates in the forward direction of the rupture, amplified, along the fault's propagation path rather than dispersed in all directions. The Sagaing fault runs roughly north-south. Bangkok lies to the south, in the forward direction of the rupture propagation. And the energy that arrived in Bangkok on March 28, 2025 was not simply the residual distant trembling of a 7.7 magnitude earthquake attenuated across 1,000 kilometers. It was directionally focused super shear energy, arriving at Bangkok's soft soil basin and being amplified a further 3 to 6 times by the geological bowl the city sits in. Stop here, because what this means for the next earthquake on the Sagaing fault is the part that Professor Penung has been saying plainly in every public statement since April 2026. And that no government warning system in Bangkok is currently equipped to communicate to the city's residents in the minutes between when the fault moves and when the waves arrive. Here is what the Sagaing fault's geometry means for Bangkok's future. The March 28, 2025 earthquake involved slip in the midsection of the Sagaing fault. That section is approximately 1,000 kilometers from Bangkok. The Sagaing fault is long. It runs roughly 1,200 kilometers through Myanmar from north to south. Its southern segments, the portions of the fault closer to Thailand's border, have not recently ruptured. Professor Penung's warning, delivered in public statements in April 2026, is specific. He says, if slip occurs in a deeper segment closer to Thailand, the impact on Bangkok could be far more severe. The 2025 earthquake was the Sagaing fault's midsection. The closer segment, the section whose rupture would send directionally focused super shear energy from a shorter distance into Bangkok's amplifying basin, has not released its accumulated stress. It is still locked, still accumulating. And there is no early warning system in Bangkok that would give residents meaningful time to act when it does. Thailand committed to implementing a cell broadcasting earthquake early warning system in 2025. Cell broadcasting is the technology that sends automatic alerts to every mobile phone within a geographic area. It is what Japan's J-Alert system uses. It is what the United States Shake Alert pushes through. It is what every city that survived its first major earthquake and rebuilt correctly has deployed. Bangkok does not have a functioning earthquake early warning system today. The commitment to implement cell broadcasting was made. The system has not been deployed. The fault is still locked. The bowl is still amplifying. The phone in a Bangkok resident's pocket will not vibrate with a warning before the next earthquake's waves arrive. It will vibrate from the earthquake itself. Both things are true about Bangkok's relationship with the Sagaing Fault. By any measure of modern urban development, Bangkok is one of the most extraordinary metropolitan environments built in the second half of the 20th century. A city of 17 million people that grew from a riverside trading post into a global metropolis in the span of a single human lifetime. A skyline that rose through the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s with speed and ambition that few cities have matched. Thousands of high-rise buildings, a mass transit network, a port, a financial district, an international airport that is among the busiest in Asia, a tourism industry that drew 39 million visitors in the year before the pandemic. A city that, on the morning of March 28, 2025, absorbed a 7.7 magnitude earthquake centered 1,000 kilometers away and lost exactly one building, while thousands of others stood. A city that, by the resilience of most of its building stock, demonstrated on that day that the engineering decisions made across its modern construction era were, in aggregate, adequate for the ground motion they actually received. And it is also a city built on a soft soil basin that amplifies distant seismic waves by 3 to 6 times, a geological condition known to researchers since the 1985 Mexico City earthquake, which produced an almost identical amplification effect in an almost identical urban geology, killing thousands of people in a city that had built its skyline on compressible lacustrine sediment without seismic design requirements. A city whose first seismic code did not include Bangkok until 2007, and whose first comprehensive seismic design standard was not issued until 2009, after most of the city's major building stock was already standing. A city where a survey of very tall buildings following a single distant earthquake found that 50% of the sample suffered damage. A city where the 10% of mid-rise buildings showing post-earthquake cracks represent, at urban scale, thousands of individual structures whose internal stress histories are unmonitored. A city where the building code directive issued after the March 2025 collapse requires inspection reports but cannot measure what those buildings' structural frames experienced during the shaking itself, because the monitoring infrastructure to make that measurement exists in 20 pilot buildings targeted for installation later this year. A city that, on May 18, 2026, 3 days ago, shook again from a 5.3 magnitude earthquake at 247 kilometers. A city where the southern segments of the Sagaing Fault, closer to Thailand than the midsection that ruptured in March 2025, remain locked, still accumulating stress, without a deployed early warning system to tell 17 million people the moment it moves. Without structural health monitoring in the pre-2009 buildings that carry Bangkok's seismic history in their unreinforced concrete. Without a public understanding, in the city where the lights swing every time Myanmar shakes, of what the ground beneath them is actually doing to the energy that arrives from distances where no city built on solid rock would feel anything at all. Professor Panung's description of Bangkok's vulnerability is the most precise statement available. He says, the biggest danger is not distance. It is Bangkok's geological conditions. The bowl amplifies. The old buildings sway at frequencies their designers did not calculate. The fault has a closer segment that has not yet moved. The warning system is not deployed. The city shook 3 days ago. Both things are still true. Bangkok survived the last earthquake because of the gap between what the fault's midsection produced and what the city's pre-code buildings could absorb. That gap is not a safety margin. It is the distance between the earthquake that happened and the earthquake that hasn't yet